At 6:03 in the morning, a deputy sheriff told me I had 6 hours to disappear from the home I had owned for years, across the street. My parents watched like they had bought tickets to my humiliation. Then I read one specific line on the paperwork and realized they had not just lied to me, they had lied to a judge. They did not know I had receipts that would turn their family plan into a criminal timeline. My name is Julia Guo, and the worst day of my life began with a sound that was not loud, but heavy. It was a rhythmic, metallic thud against the solid oak of my front door. It was the kind of knock that did not ask for permission. It demanded attention. The digital clock on my nightstand read 6:03 in the morning. The room was gray with the early dawn light. My heart did not just accelerate, it slammed against my ribs like a trapped bird. I sat up in bed. My breath caught in my throat. I was 38 years old. I was a homeowner. I paid my taxes. I had a credit score of 800. People like me did not get knocks on the door at this hour unless someone was dead. I swung my legs out of bed. The hardwood floor was cold against my bare feet. I did not grab a robe. I grabbed my phone. I walked down the hallway. The house was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I loved this silence. I had bought this silence 3 years ago. I had paid for every square inch of this piece with money I earned, not money I was given. The knock came again. 3 sharp raps. I reached the front door. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to be still. I pressed my eye to the peephole. The lens distorted the image on the other side, but the colors were unmistakable. Tan shirt, dark brown trousers, a gold star pinned to the chest, a utility belt heavy with a radio, a taser, and a firearm, a deputy sheriff. I looked past him, toward the street. A patrol vehicle was parked at the curb. There were no lights flashing. There was no siren. The engine was off. It sat there like a predator that had already caught its prey. He had not come here to save me. He had come here to serve me. I unlocked the deadbolt. The sound of the tumbler turning felt incredibly loud in the morning stillness. I did not open the door fully. I kept the security chain engaged. It was a flimsy piece of gold-painted metal. But right now, it was the only barrier between my life and the disaster standing on my porch. I opened the door 3 inches. The morning air was crisp and smelled of damp grass. The deputy was young, perhaps in his late 20s. He looked tired. He held a clipboard in one hand and a thick stack of papers in the other. "Julia Guo?" he asked. It was not a question. It was a verification. "I am Julia," I said. My voice sounded strange. It was flat. It was mechanical. He nodded once. He did not look sympathetic. He did not look malicious. He looked like a man who had 5 more of these to do before his shift ended. "I have a writ of possession for this property," he said. He extended the paperwork through the gap in the door. "You have been evicted. The court has ordered immediate possession returned to the owners. You have until 12 noon today to vacate the premises." The words did not make sense. I stared at him. I did not reach for the papers immediately. "I own this house." I said, "I have the deed." The deputy shook his head. He had heard this before. He did not care. "That is a matter for the civil court." "Ma'am," he said, "right now, I have a signed order from a judge. It says you are a tenant holding over after lease expiration. It says the owners have the right to reclaim the property. If you are not out by 12 noon, the physical eviction team will arrive to remove you and your belongings." He shoved the papers closer to my face. "Take them," he said. I took the stack. The paper felt heavy. It felt toxic. I looked down at the top page. It was a standard court form. In the top left corner, there was a case number. I memorized it instantly. Beside it was the stamp of the County Superior Court. It was dated 8 days ago. I scanned the lines. Plaintiff. There were 2 names listed. My father's name, my mother's name, defendant, Julia Guo. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was not fear. It was a cold, clarifying shock. It was the feeling of a puzzle piece finally snapping into place, revealing a picture so ugly you wanted to look away. But you could not. I looked up. My eyes shifted past the deputy, over his shoulder, across the lawn, and to the other side of the street. They were there. My parents were standing on the sidewalk opposite my house. They were not hiding. They were not sitting in their car. They were standing side by side, like spectators at a parade. My father wore his gray windbreaker, his hands clasped behind his back. My mother was wearing her long beige coat, her purse clutched in front of her with both hands. They were watching me. I waited for the shame. I waited to feel the crushing weight of embarrassment that they had trained me to feel for my entire life. I waited for the instinct to beg, to plead, to run across the street and ask them why they were doing this. But the shame did not come. Instead, I looked at their faces. They were too far away for me to see their eyes clearly. But I knew their expressions. I knew the set of my father's jaw. I knew the tilt of my mother's head. They were not sad. They were not worried about their daughter being thrown onto the street. They looked satisfied. They looked like they had just won a bet. They looked like they had finally corrected a mistake. The mistake was me having independence. The correction was this man with a badge standing on my porch. The deputy cleared his throat. "Did you understand what I said, ma'am?" he asked. 12 noon. "That is 6 hours." I looked back at him. I did not cry. Tears would be a waste of hydration. I needed to be sharp. I needed to be a machine. "I understand." I said, "Can I have a moment to review this order before I close the door?" He checked his watch. He seemed surprised that I was not screaming. He seemed surprised that I was not begging him to call his supervisor. "Make it quick," he said. I did not read the text. I did not waste time on the legal boilerplate. I flipped the pages. I was looking for the mechanics of the lie. A lie this big needed infrastructure. It needed signatures. It needed dates. I found the proof of service page. My eyes narrowed. According to this paper, I had been served with the lawsuit 20 days ago. It said a process server had handed the documents to an adult occupant at the residence. I looked at the address listed for service. It was not my address. It was an apartment complex on the other side of town. It was a place my parents owned. It was a place I had lived in for 6 months after college, 15 years ago. I looked at the signature of the person who accepted the service. It was a scrawl, but it was legible enough. It was my mother's name. My mother had accepted the lawsuit meant for me, at a house I did not live in, acting as the adult occupant. Then I flipped to the lease agreement attached as an exhibit. It was a single page. It was pathetic. It claimed I was renting this house from them for $2,000 a month. At the bottom, there was a signature. Julia Guo. I stared at the ink. It was shaky. The loop on the J was wrong. The slant was too vertical. It was a forgery. It was a lazy, arrogant forgery. They had not even tried to copy my actual signature. They had just written my name and assumed that because they were my parents, their version of me was the only one that mattered. I pulled my phone from my pajama pocket. "What are you doing?" the deputy asked. "I am documenting the service," I said. My voice was ice. I held the papers up against the door frame to steady them. I took a photo of the first page. Click. I made sure the case number was clear. Click. I turned the page. I took a photo of the judge's signature. Click. I took a photo of the proof of service. Click. I zoomed in on the address. Click. I took a photo of the fake lease. Click. I took a photo of the fake signature. Click. The deputy shifted his weight. "You have the hard copies," he said. "You do not need pictures." "I do." I said, "Paper can be lost. Digital files live forever." I handed the clipboard back to him, but I kept the packet of papers he had given me. 12 noon. I said, 12 noon. He repeated, "If you are still here, you will be arrested for trespassing." I nodded. I stepped back and began to close the door. As the gap narrowed, I heard a voice boom from across the street. It was my father. He had seen the exchange. He saw the door closing. He needed to have the last word. He always needed to have the last word. "Clean it up, Julia," he shouted. His voice echoed in the quiet morning street. "Do not make a scene. Do not make the family look bad." Then my mother's voice joined his. It was higher, sharper, cutting through the air like a serrated knife. "You brought this on yourself," she called out. "You left us no choice." I looked at them through the sliver of open air. They stood there, shoulder to shoulder, righteous in their betrayal. They truly believed they were the victims here. They believed that stripping me of my home, my sanctuary, and my dignity was a form of parenting. They thought this was a lesson. I did not answer them. I did not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I did not give them a sound bite they could use later to tell the relatives how unstable I was. I shut the door. I slid the deadbolt home. Click. The house was silent again. But the silence felt different now. It felt fragile. It felt temporary. I had 5 hours and 50 minutes. I did not go back to bed. I did not go to the kitchen to make coffee. I walked straight to the master bedroom closet. I pushed aside the hanging clothes, the blazers, the dresses, the shirts I wore to my job as a systems analyst. I knelt down on the floor and pulled up a loose floorboard in the back corner. Underneath was a small, fireproof safe. I keyed in the code, 4 digits. The light turned green. I opened the lid. Inside sat a black, fire-resistant document bag. I had packed this bag 2 years ago. I had packed it after a Thanksgiving dinner where my father had joked about how easy it would be to declare me incompetent and take over my finances. He had laughed, but his eyes had not laughed. That night, I went home and packed the bag. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I was watching too many crime dramas. Today, I realized I had not been paranoid enough. I pulled the bag out. It was heavy. It contained the reality of my life, the reality they were trying to rewrite. I unzipped it to check the contents. My hands were steady now. The adrenaline had settled into a cold, hard focus. First, the deed to the house, the real deed, the one recorded with the county 3 years ago when I bought the property from the previous owners. A nice elderly couple named the Hendersons. It showed the transfer of title. It showed my name, only my name. Second, my tax returns for the last 5 years. They proved my income. They proved I paid the property taxes. Tenants do not pay property taxes. Owners pay property taxes. Third, the bank statements showing the mortgage payments leaving my account every month, not rent checks to my parents. Mortgage payments to the bank. Fourth, a certified copy of my grandmother's will. The will that had left me the down payment for this house. The will my parents had tried to contest and failed. That money was the seed of my independence, and they had hated it. I zipped the bag shut. This was not just paper. This was my shield. This was my sword. I went to the dresser and pulled out a pair of jeans, a black turtleneck, and my running shoes. I dressed quickly. I did not look in the mirror. I did not care what I looked like. I only cared about being efficient. I looked around the room. There were things I wanted to take, my books, the painting I had bought in gallery downtown, the vase my best friend had given me. But I could not take them. If I started packing boxes, I would slow down. If I slowed down, I might start to feel. And if I started to feel, I would lose. I had to leave, but I was not going to leave the way they wanted. They were waiting for me to walk out the front door. They were waiting for me to drag a suitcase down the driveway, crying, defeated, looking for a ride. They wanted to see the eviction. They wanted to witness the moment I became homeless so they could swoop in, offer me a room in their basement, and reestablish the control they had lost. I grabbed my purse. I put the fireproof bag inside a nondescript canvas tote. I checked my phone. 6:15 in the morning. I walked to the back of the house. I went through the kitchen, past the stainless steel appliances I had saved up for months to buy. I unlocked the back door. I stepped out onto the rear deck. The air was still cold. The backyard was fenced, private. Behind my fence was a narrow service alley that the garbage trucks used. I closed the back door softly. I locked it from the outside. I walked across the damp grass to the back gate. I unlatched it. I stepped into the alley. I looked back at my house one last time. From this angle, it looked peaceful. It looked like a home. It did not look like a crime scene, but that was exactly what it was. My parents had turned the legal system into a weapon, and they had pointed it straight at my chest. I turned away. I began to walk down the alley, away from the street, away from the audience in the front row. They were waiting for a show. They were waiting for a victim. They were going to be disappointed. I was not a victim. I was a plaintiff who had just been handed the most damaging evidence imaginable, and they had signed their names to the bottom of it. I walked faster. The gravel crunched under my shoes. I needed a coffee. I needed a scanner. And then, I needed to go to the courthouse. My parents thought the clock was ticking for me. They were wrong. The clock had just started ticking for them. The alleyway behind my house was narrow, paved with cracked asphalt and lined with the heavy plastic bins of my neighbors. I walked with a steady, deliberate pace, the canvas tote bag pressing against my side. I did not run. Running was for people who were guilty. Running was for people who were afraid. I was simply relocating my center of operations. As the familiar silhouette of my roofline disappeared behind a row of cedar fencing, I felt a phantom ache in my chest. It was not sentimental. It was territorial. That house was not a structure my parents had handed to me. It was not a graduation present. It was not a wedding gift for a wedding that never happened. It was mine. I remembered the day I signed the closing papers 3 years ago. The room smelled of stale coffee and printer toner. My hands had shaken as I wrote the check for the down payment. That money had come from my grandmother, a woman who had understood the value of escape routes long before I did. When she passed, she left everything to me, bypassing my parents entirely. It was a final, silent commentary on her son and daughter-in-law that they had never forgiven. They had tried to challenge the will. Of course, they had suggested she was not of sound mind. But the paperwork held up. It always came down to paperwork. I had taken that money and bought a fixer-upper that smelled of mildew and neglect. I spent my weekends tearing up rotted carpet. I spent my evenings learning how to sweat copper pipes on the internet. When the water heater burst last winter, I was the one who waded into the freezing basement to shut off the main valve. I was the one who paid the plumber $1,200 for the replacement. I paid the property taxes every 6 months. I paid the insurance. I mowed the lawn. I planted the hydrangeas in the front bed. My parents had never hammered a nail into those walls. They had never paid a utility bill. To them, the house was just a symbol of my refusal to need them. I reached the end of the alley and turned onto the main avenue. The morning commuter traffic was just starting to build. Cars rushed past, their drivers oblivious to the woman walking on the sidewalk with her entire life in a tote bag. My relationship with my parents had always been a series of transactions disguised as affection. They did not give gifts. They made investments. Every birthday present, every ride to soccer practice, every paid tuition bill came with an invisible invoice. They kept a ledger in their heads, a running tally of obligation that could never be fully paid off. They used the word family the way a mobster uses the word protection. It was not a source of comfort. It was a method of enforcement. If I missed a Sunday dinner, I was ungrateful. If I did not take their advice on a career move, I was disrespectful. If I dated someone they did not approve of, I was betraying the lineage. They had a way of looking at me, a disappointment that was so curated it felt heavy, like a physical weight on my shoulders. But things had changed 6 months ago. The temperature of our Cold War had dropped significantly. I remembered the dinner vividly. It was a Tuesday. They had invited themselves over, bringing a casserole I did not ask for and a bottle of wine I did not drink. We sat at my dining table, the one I had refinished myself. My father had pushed his plate away before he was finished. That was always the signal. He had cleared his throat and placed a folder on the table. "We have been thinking," he had said. His voice was casual, too casual. "With the market the way it is, and your job being so stressful, we think it would be smart to restructure some things." Restructure was a business word. My father loved business words. They made his control-freak tendencies sound like financial wisdom. He opened the folder. Inside were papers prepared by their family attorney. They were transfer documents. They wanted me to add their names to the deed of my house. "It is for your protection," my mother had added, smiling that tight, thin smile that never reached her eyes. "If something happens to you, we can step in without probate. We can help manage the equity. We can leverage it for future investments for the whole family. They wanted to turn my home into a family asset. They wanted to liquidate my independence to fund their own maneuvers. I knew they had made some bad calls in the stock market recently. I knew they were leveraged, but they would never admit that. They framed it as helping me. I had looked at the papers, then I had looked at them. No, I had said. The silence that followed was absolute. It was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a predator recalculating the distance to the prey. My father did not yell. He did not slam the table. He just closed the folder. "You are making a mistake. Julia," he had said. "You are vulnerable out here alone. You do not understand how the world works. I understand perfectly." I had replied, and the answer is no. They had left 10 minutes later. They took the casserole with them. After that night, the dynamic shifted. The passive-aggressive comments about my weight or my single status stopped. The daily text messages demanding to know my schedule stopped. They pulled back. At the time, I thought it was a victory. I thought I had finally drawn a boundary they respected. I was naive. They had not retreated. They had simply gone underground. They stopped trying to persuade me and started preparing to break me. I walked past a bus stop, ignoring the curious look of a woman waiting for the number 42. I realize now that the silence of the last 6 months was not peace. It was the quiet of an army digging trenches. I had felt it, though. I had felt the change in the air. Even if I could not name it. A few months ago, I had come home from work to find my front door unlocked. Nothing was missing. The TV was still there. My jewelry was untouched, but a stack of mail on the counter had been moved. A chair in the living room was angled slightly differently. I knew they still had a key from when I first moved in, a spare I had given them in a moment of weakness, thinking that in an emergency, parents should have access. The next day, I hired a locksmith. I spent $200 to replace every lock on the exterior doors. I did not tell them. I did not ask for the old key back. I simply revoked their access. When I told my mother later that week that I had updated the security, she had gone silent on the phone, a long, heavy pause. "Why would you do that?" she had asked. "Do you not trust us? I trust you to be yourselves." I had said, "That was the last honest conversation we had." I paused at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. The wind whipped my hair across my face. I pushed it back. I did not hate them. Hate was a hot, messy emotion. Hate implied that I was still looking for their approval and was angry I was not getting it. I was past that. What I felt was a cold, crystallizing clarity. I finally saw them without the filter of childhood. They were people who could not survive without control. They were people who viewed a disagreement as a failure of authority. They were willing to use the legal system, the sheriff's department, and the integrity of the court to win an argument that should have happened over coffee. They did not want the house because they needed a place to live. They had a perfectly large house 5 miles away. They wanted my house because it was the physical manifestation of my no. Taking the house was their way of erasing that no if they could kick me out, if they could force me to crawl back to them for shelter. They would prove their point. They would prove that I was incompetent. They would prove that I could not survive without them. They would rewrite the narrative so that I was the wayward child who failed. And they were the benevolent saviors who took me back in. They were willing to commit perjury to make that happen. They were willing to forge my signature. They were willing to stand on the sidewalk and watch a deputy sheriff humiliate me. The light changed. I stepped off the curb. My house was not just 4 walls and a roof. It was my sanity. It was the one place in the world where I did not have to defend my existence. It was my boundary line. And this morning, at 6 o'clock, they had crossed that line with a piece of paper signed by a judge who had no idea he was being used as a weapon in a domestic dispute. I checked my watch. 6:45. I had been walking for 20 minutes. I needed a secure place to work. I needed Wi-Fi. I needed a scanner. I could go to a friend's house, but that would involve explaining. It would involve tea and sympathy and questions like, how could they do this? I did not have the energy for exposition. I needed to be tactical. I headed toward the business district. There was a 24-hour copy and print center near the courthouse. It would be open. It would be anonymous. As I walked, I thought about the look on my father's face as the door closed. He looked so sure of himself. He thought he had checkmated me. He thought that by the time I unraveled the legal mess, the eviction would be done, the locks would be changed, and he would be holding the keys. He was banking on my shock. He was banking on me crumbling. He had forgotten one thing. He was the one who taught me how to be cold. He was the one who taught me that feelings were a liability and that documentation was king. He was the one who taught me to keep receipts. He thought he was evicting a daughter. He was about to find out he had just served papers to a mirror image of himself, only younger, faster, and with nothing left to lose. I gripped the strap of my tote bag tighter. The weight of the documents inside bumped against my hip. Let them have the morning. I thought, let them stand on the sidewalk and gloat. Let them tell the neighbors how sad it is that poor Julia could not keep her life together. By the time the sun hit the top of the courthouse steps, I would be ready. I was not going to argue with them. I was not going to scream. I was going to file. And when I was done, they would wish they had simply respected the locks I paid $200 to change. The fluorescent lights of the 24-hour copy center hummed with a sound that was almost aggressive. It was 6:55 in the morning. The shop was empty. Save for a sleepy employee restocking paper behind the counter and me, I chose a workstation in the back corner, away from the glass windows, away from the street. I laid the stack of papers the deputy had given me onto the gray laminate table, here, under the harsh white light. The documents looked terrifyingly official. They were crisp. The toner was dark. The court seal was embossed with perfect symmetry. That was the thing about legal lies. They did not look like lies. They looked like order. They looked like authority. I took a breath and forced myself to stop seeing the betrayal and start seeing the data. I needed to dissect the anatomy of this eviction. I started with the complaint for unlawful detainer. This was the document that started the war. In the eyes of the state of California, I was not Julia Guo, the homeowner. I was listed as a defendant. Underneath my name, the box for tenant was checked. My parents were listed as plaintiffs and landlords. I read the narrative they had supplied to the court. It was a masterpiece of fiction. It stated that I had entered into a verbal month-to-month lease agreement starting 3 years ago. It claimed the rent was $2,000 a month. It claimed that for the last 2 months, I had failed to pay. It claimed they had served me with a 3-day notice to pay or quit, and that I had ignored it. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I had never paid rent because I paid the mortgage. I had never received a 3-day notice because they never sent one. But the court did not know that. The court only knew what was in this file. To the judge who signed this, I was just another deadbeat renter trying to squat in a property I did not own. I turned the page to the most critical document in the stack, the proof of service. In the American legal system, you cannot sue someone without telling them. You have to serve them the papers. Due process hinges on this single act. If the service is bad, the lawsuit is invalid. I looked at the section titled Server's Affidavit. The law requires that a lawsuit be served to the defendant personally, or if the defendant cannot be found, it can be left with a competent adult at the defendant's residence. This is called substitute service. I scanned the lines. The process server, a man named Gary L. Miller, according to the stamp, swore under penalty of perjury that he had attempted to serve me at my home address on 3 separate occasions. I looked at the dates listed for these attempts. Attempt 1, Monday at 10 in the morning. Attempt 2, Tuesday at 6 in the evening. Attempt 3, Wednesday at 7 in the morning. I frowned. On that Monday, I was working from home. I was sitting 10 feet from the front door. My dog barks at the wind. If someone had knocked, I would have known. On that Tuesday, I was cooking dinner. On that Wednesday, I was getting ready for work. No one had knocked. Then I looked at the final entry, the successful service. The box for substitute service was checked. The text read, "Documents accepted by adult occupant/co-resident at the dwelling house or usual place of abode." My eyes slid to the address line. I stopped breathing for a second. The address listed was not my house. It was not the house I had slept in last night. It was not the house the deputy sheriff had just visited. The address was 402 Maple Street, apartment 4B. I stared at the numbers. 402 Maple Street. That was an apartment complex my parents owned. It was a rental unit. I had lived there for 6 months when I was 22. Right after I graduated college, I had not set foot in that apartment in 15 years. It was currently rented to a college student. My parents had told the process server that I lived at their rental property. They had directed the lawsuit to an address they controlled. And then, the final twist of the knife. I looked at the name of the person who accepted the papers. Name of person served: Margaret Guo. Relationship to defendant: mother/co-resident. The room spun slightly. My mother had gone to the apartment she owned. She had opened the door to the process server she likely hired. She had told him she lived there with me. She had accepted the lawsuit meant for me. And then, she had likely thrown it in the trash or filed it away in her own records. It was perfect. It was diabolical. On paper. It looked clean. The process server did his job. The papers were handed to a competent adult at the defendant's residence. The court assumed the address was correct because the plaintiff swore it was. Because I never received the papers. I never showed up to court to defend myself. And because I never showed up, the judge had no choice but to grant a default judgment. That was why the deputy was at my door. I had lost a trial I did not even know was happening. I pulled out my phone. It was 7:05 in the morning. The court clerk's office opened at 8, but the automated lines usually started earlier. I dialed the number for the civil division printed on the header of the paperwork. My hand was shaking, but my voice needed to be steady. I put the phone on speaker and set it on the table. "Thank you for calling the Superior Court Civil Division," the robotic voice said. I navigated the menu. Press 1 for case status. Press 2 to enter a case number. I typed in the numbers from the eviction order. CV 249008. The automated voice paused. Searching the database. Case number CV 249008. Guo versus Guo. Unlawful detainer. Status: closed. Judgment entered for plaintiff by default on January 26th. Writ of possession issued January 29th. Closed. The word hung in the air like a sentence. I pressed 0. I needed a human. I needed to speak to someone who could hear the panic I was suppressing. The hold music started. It was a tinny, distorted classical piece. I sat there, listening to the violins, watching the second hand on the wall clock tick, tick, 7:10, tick, 7:15, tick, 7:20. Finally, the music stopped. Civil Division. "This is Clerk Robinson. How can I help you?" The voice was brisk, efficient, tired. "Yes," I said. "My name is Julia Guo. I am the defendant in case CV 249008. I have a deputy sheriff at my house with a lockout order for 12 noon today." I paused. I needed to say this clearly. I was never served with this lawsuit. I said, "The judgment was entered in error." I heard the sound of typing on the other end. "One moment," the clerk said. The silence stretched for 30 seconds. "Ma'am," the clerk said, her voice sounding even more detached. "The record shows a proof of service filed on January 10th. Substitute service was accepted at your residence." "No," I said, "that is the problem. The address listed on the proof of service is not my residence. It is an apartment my parents own. I live at the property being evicted, which is 115 Oak Street. I have never lived at the address where the papers were served." The typing stopped. "Ma'am, I cannot take testimony over the phone." The clerk said, "If you are contesting the service, you need to file a motion." "I understand." I said, "But the sheriff is coming in 5 hours. Then you need to file an ex parte application to stay execution of the writ." She said, "And you need to file a motion to set aside the default judgment. You need to do this immediately. Is there any way to stop the sheriff from here?" I asked, "Can you call them?" "No," she said. "The sheriff acts on the court's order until a judge signs a new order stopping the eviction. The sheriff will proceed. You need to come to the courthouse. You need to go to the self-help center or hire an attorney, get the forms, file them with the window, and ask for an emergency hearing." I looked at the paperwork spread out before me. Can I get a copy of the exhibits filed with the complaint? I asked. The lease agreement. The proof of service. I only have the writ the deputy gave me. They are in the case file, she said. You can view the file when you get here. We open the doors at 8. If you want to stop a noon lockout, you need to be in line at the security checkpoint right now. Thank you, I said. I hung up. My phone buzzed immediately. A text message. I looked at the screen. It was my father. Julia, be reasonable. We are doing this for your own good. You are clearly not managing well. Pack your things. We have a room ready for you at the house. Do not make a fuss. I stared at the words. Not managing well. That was the narrative. They were creating a paper trail of concern to cover their paper trail of fraud. If I reacted, if I screamed, if I sent back a text full of profanity, they would show it to a judge and say, "See, she is unstable." I did not reply. Another buzz. My mother this time. The neighbors are watching. Don't embarrass the family. Just go. I felt a surge of rage so hot it almost made me dizzy. But I pushed it down. Rage was useless. Rage was fuel for their fire. I needed to be cold. I needed to be administrative. I turned back to the papers. I needed to digitize everything. If they had filed false documents, I needed to prove they were false. I walked over to the large multifunction copier in the center of the store. I inserted my credit card. I placed the writ of possession on the glass. Scan. I placed the photo I had taken of the fake lease on the glass. I had printed it out from my phone using the store's Bluetooth connection a moment ago. Scan. I scanned the photo of the proof of service. Scan. I went back to the computer workstation. I created a new folder on my cloud drive. I named it simply case_CV2-49008_defense. I started renaming the files. Exhibit_A_ writ_ of_ possession. Exhibit_B_ fraudulent _proof_ of_ service. Exhibit_C_ forged _lease _agreement. I opened a blank document. I needed to write a declaration. A declaration is a sworn statement. It is your voice in court. I typed the header. Declaration of Julia Guo in support of ex parte application to stay execution. I started typing. I did not use adjectives. I used facts. Julia Guo, declare as follows. 1. I am the owner of the property located at 115 Oak Street. 2. I reside at 115 Oak Street and have resided there continuously for 3 years. 3. I do not reside at 402 Maple Street. 4. I was never served with the summons and complaint in this action. 5. The signature on the lease agreement attached to the complaint is not my signature. I typed fast. The keys clattered in the quiet shop. I was not writing a story. I was building a wall. I checked the time. 7:30. I had 30 minutes to get to the courthouse, get through security, and find the filing window. I saved the files. I emailed them to myself. I emailed them to a secondary email account my parents did not know about. I printed 3 copies of everything. I gathered the warm pages from the tray. They felt substantial. They felt like ammunition. I put everything back into my canvas tote bag. I threw in the stapler I had bought from the shelf. I threw in a box of blue pens. I walked out of the copy center into the morning light. The city was waking up. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows across the pavement. My parents were probably sitting at their breakfast table right now, drinking tea, thinking the hard part was over. They thought the legal system was a machine they could turn on and off with a switch. They did not understand that the machine had gears. They did not understand that if you threw a wrench into those gears, the whole thing could grind to a halt. And they certainly did not understand that their daughter was no longer the soft, compliant child they remembered. I was the wrench. I hailed a cab. Courthouse. I said to the driver, civil entrance. And please, hurry. As the car pulled away, I looked at my phone one last time. Another text from my father. It is almost 8. Are you packing? I deleted the thread. I was not packing. I was preparing to unpack their entire scheme in front of a judge. Today was not a day for emotions. Today was a day for procedure, and I was going to follow the procedure until it choked them. The County Superior Court building was a fortress of gray concrete and tinted glass, looming over the downtown district like a monolith of judgment. It was 7:45 in the morning. The doors were not yet open to the public, but a line had already formed. It snaked down the steps and onto the sidewalk, a queue of people holding manila envelopes, clutching coffee cups, and wearing expressions that ranged from bored to desperate. I joined the end of the line. The air was still sharp with the morning chill, but I was sweating under my coat. My canvas tote bag felt heavier now, loaded with the 3 copies of every document I had printed at the copy center. I checked my watch. 7:48. The deputy sheriff had said 12 noon. That meant I had 4 hours and 12 minutes to undo a legal knot that my parents had spent weeks tying. At 8 o'clock exactly, the heavy glass doors unlocked with a synchronized clack. The line surged forward. I moved with them, keeping my head down, focusing on the back of the jacket in front of me. Inside, the building smelled of industrial floor wax, old paper, and cheap cologne. It was the smell of bureaucracy. It was the smell of a place where lives were reduced to file numbers and timestamps. I reached the security checkpoint. It was like the airport, but with less hope. I placed my tote bag on the conveyor belt. I took off my belt. I took off my watch. I walked through the metal detector. Beep. The guard held up a hand. "Step back," he said. I stepped back. I realized I still had my house keys in my pocket. The keys to the locks I had changed. The keys that might not work by lunchtime if I failed here. I placed them in the plastic bin. I walked through again. Silence. I grabbed my bag and walked fast toward the elevators. The directory listed the civil division on the 3rd floor. I did not wait for the elevator. I took the stairs. Taking them 2 at a time, my legs burned. But the physical exertion helped burn off the adrenaline that was making my hands shake. The 3rd floor was a wide hallway lined with wooden benches and service windows. A digital board displayed ticket numbers. I went to the intake kiosk and pressed the button for emergency filings. A slip of paper printed out. A 004. There were already 3 people ahead of me. I sat on the edge of a bench. I did not look at my phone. I did not check my texts. I stared at the digital board, willing the numbers to change. Ding, a 001. Ding, a 002. Time moved differently in a courthouse. It was viscous. It dragged. Every minute on the wall clock felt like 10 minutes in the real world. Finally, ding, a 004. Window 6. I stood up and walked to the window. Behind the thick glass partition sat a clerk. He was a middle-aged man with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose and a nameplate that read, J. Martinez. He looked like he had seen every possible variation of human misery and was unimpressed by all of them. ID and case number, he said without looking up. I slid my driver's license under the glass. I placed the writ of possession on top of it. Case CV 249008. I said, I need to file an ex parte application to stay execution. The lockout is scheduled for today at 12 noon. The mention of the time frame made him look up. In the court system, today is a magic word. It cuts through the red tape. He pulled the file up on his computer. I saw the reflection of the screen in his glasses. He typed a few keys. Judgment was entered last week. He said, You are late. I was never served. I said, my voice was low but hard. I leaned closer to the microphone. The address on the proof of service is incorrect. It is a property the plaintiffs own, not where I live, and the person who signed for the papers is the plaintiff herself. The clerk paused. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He looked at me, then back at the screen. Say that again, he said. The plaintiff, Margaret Guo, accepted the substitute service at an address she owns, claiming to be a resident. I said, I have lived at the subject property, 115 Oak Street, alone for 3 years. I have never lived at the service address. He frowned. It was a deep, skeptical frown. He clicked the mouse, opening a scanned document on his screen. I knew what he was looking at. He was looking at the proof of service. He squinted. He scrolled down. He compared the name on the signature line to the name of the plaintiff listed at the top of the file. Margaret Guo, he muttered. Margaret Guo. He let out a short, sharp breath through his nose. It was almost a laugh, but devoid of humor. He stood up and walked to a printer in the back of the room. He grabbed a sheet of paper and walked back. He slid it under the glass to me. It was the proof of service. He picked up a yellow highlighter from his desk and slid that under the glass, too. He did not say, "You are right." He did not say, "This is illegal. Clerks are not allowed to give legal advice," but he looked me in the eye and tapped his finger on the glass. Directly over the section where my mother had signed her name. "Make sure the judge sees this," he said quietly. "Highlight it." I uncapped the marker. The smell of the ink was pungent. I drew a thick yellow line through the words, "Accepted by Margaret Guo." I drew another line through the address, 402 Maple Street. I slid the paper back to him, along with my stack of evidence. "I have my ex parte application here," I said. "I have my declaration, and I have exhibits proving my actual residence." I started passing the documents through the slot. Exhibit A, my utility bills for the last 6 months, addressed to 115 Oak Street. Exhibit B, my car registration, showing the same address. Exhibit C, my homeowner's insurance policy. The clerk took them. He started stamping them with a rhythmic, heavy thud. Filed, filed, filed. The sound was comforting. It was the sound of my truth becoming official record. Then I slid over the copy of the lease agreement my parents had submitted. "This is the lease they filed," I said. "It is 1 page. The signature is a forgery." The clerk glanced at it. He compared the signature on the lease to the signature on my driver's license, which was still sitting on his desk. The difference was comical. The lease signature was loopy and hesitant. My real signature was sharp and jagged. He raised an eyebrow. "Okay," he said. He gathered the stamped papers into a folder. "You need to pay the filing fee, $620. I handed him my credit card. I did not care about the money. I would have paid $6,000. He ran the card. He handed me a receipt. "I am sending this up to Department 42. Judge Holloway," he said, "you need to go up to the 4th floor and wait outside the courtroom. The judicial assistant will come out to collect the moving papers. Tell her it is an emergency lockout." "Thank you," I said. I gathered my copies and turned away from the window. My legs felt weak, but I forced them to move. I took the elevator this time. The 4th floor was quieter. The hallway was lined with heavy wooden doors. I found Department 42. There were a few lawyers standing around in expensive suits, checking their phones, joking about golf scores. They looked at me, a woman in jeans and a turtleneck, clutching a tote bag, and looked away. I was not part of their club. I sat on a bench near the door. I waited. 8:45, 8:50, at 8:55, the heavy door opened. A woman stepped out. She was in her 50s, wearing a sensible navy cardigan and holding a clipboard. This was the judicial assistant. In many ways, she was more powerful than the judge. She controlled the schedule. She looked around the hallway, Guo versus Guo. She called out. I stood up. "I am Julia Guo." She looked me over the rim of her glasses. She did not smile. "You filed an ex parte to stay in eviction." She said. "Yes," I said. "The sheriff is coming at noon." She held out her hand. "Give me your courtesy copies." I handed her the folder. She opened it right there in the hallway. She was not skimming. She was reading. She flipped past the first page. She stopped at the highlighted proof of service. I watched her eyes. They narrowed. She looked at the highlighted name. Then she looked at the case caption. Then she looked back at the highlighted name. She flipped to the next exhibit, the utility bills, then the lease. Her expression changed. The bureaucratic indifference vanished, replaced by a look of sharp, professional alertness. She closed the folder. "Wait here," she said. She turned and went back into the courtroom. The door clicked shut. I stood there. My heart was hammering against my ribs again. I checked my phone. 9:10. I had less than 3 hours. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The lawyers in the hallway started filing into the courtroom for the morning calendar. I was not allowed in yet. Ex parte hearings happened in the judge's chambers or during a break. At 9:30, the door opened again. The assistant came out. She walked straight to me. Her face was grim. "The judge has reviewed your application," she said. Her voice was lower now. "Confidential, because of the imminent lockout and the irregularities in the proof of service. He is going to hear this immediately. He is clearing a slot before the 10 o'clock calendar." "Thank you," I breathed. I felt a wave of relief so strong it almost knocked me over. She did not step back. She stayed close, blocking the view from the other lawyers. She held the file against her chest. "Ms. Guo," she said, "there is something else." I looked at her. The tone of her voice made my stomach clench. "What is it?" I asked. "When we pulled the physical file to compare your exhibits, we found another document that was filed yesterday." She said, "It was not in the system yet because it was dropped in the overnight box. My parents filed something else." I asked. She nodded. She looked around to make sure no one was listening. "It is not just an eviction anymore," she said. "It is a grant deed. It was recorded yesterday afternoon." I stared at her. I did not understand. "A grant deed?" I repeated. "Yes," she said. "A deed transferring the title of the property at 115 Oak Street from Julia Guo to Robert and Margaret Guo." The hallway seemed to tilt. The floor felt like it was sliding away. "That is impossible," I said. "I have the original deed in my bag. I never signed a transfer." The assistant looked at me with a mixture of pity and warning. "According to the file, you did," she said. "It was notarized yesterday. The judge saw it. That is why he is calling you in now. He wants to know why you are fighting an eviction from a house you apparently sold to your parents yesterday for $10. I felt the blood drain from my face. They had not just tried to kick me out. They had stolen the house. They had forged my signature on a deed and recorded it while I was sleeping. "I did not sell it." I whispered. "I was at work yesterday. I have security logs." She nodded. "Good," she said. "You are going to need them, because this just went from a landlord-tenant dispute to a felony fraud case." She opened the door and held it for me. "Come inside, Ms. de Guo," she said. "The judge is waiting." I walked through the door into the courtroom. It was large and paneled in dark wood. The seal of the state of California hung on the wall behind the high bench. My parents were already there. They were sitting at the counsel table on the right. They were wearing their Sunday church clothes. My father was whispering to a man in a cheap suit, their lawyer. My mother was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, looking small and fragile. They did not look at me as I walked in. They stared straight ahead at the empty judge's bench. I walked to the table on the left. I set my canvas bag down. I took out my folder. I took out my notepad. I looked at the clock on the wall. 9:40. I had come here to stop a sheriff. Now, I realized I was here to stop a heist. The bailiff stood up. "All rise," he bellowed. "Department 42 is now in session. The Honorable Judge Holloway presiding." I stood up. My legs were steady now. The shock of the deed had burned away the fear. All that was left was a cold, hard rage. "You want the house," I thought, looking at the back of my father's head. "You want the title. You are going to get a criminal record instead." Judge Holloway was a man who looked like he had been carved out of the same mahogany as the bench he sat behind. He was bald, wearing wire-rimmed glasses, and he did not look up when the bailiff announced the case. He kept reading the file in front of him, his hand occasionally turning a page with a dry, papery sound that echoed in the silent courtroom. "Guo versus Guo," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. "Case number CV 249008, ex parte, application to stay, execution of writ of possession." He looked up then. His eyes were gray and unreadable. "Appearances," he commanded. The man in the cheap suit at the other table stood up. He smoothed his tie. "Harold Sterling for the plaintiffs. Robert and Margaret Guo." "Your Honor, the plaintiffs are present." I stood up. My legs felt like wood, but I kept my back straight. "Julia Guo, defendant, in pro per, Your Honor." The judge nodded. He looked at me, then he looked at my parents. My father offered a small, deferential nod, the kind he used when he was trying to charm a waiter or a business partner. My mother looked down at her hands, playing the role of the weary matriarch perfectly. They looked like they were here to clear up a misunderstanding, not to finalize an eviction. "Ms. Guo," the judge said, turning his attention to me, "you are asking this court to stop a sheriff's lockout scheduled for 12 noon today. That is in less than 2 hours. The judgment against you was entered by default because you failed to answer the complaint. Why should I intervene at the 11th hour?" I took a breath. I did not look at my parents. I looked only at the judge. "Your Honor, I am asking for a stay because the default judgment was obtained through fraud." I said, "I was never served with the lawsuit. The proof of service in the file is defective and deceptive." "Mr." Sterling jumped in before I could finish. "Objection, Your Honor," he said, his voice smooth and oily. "The proof of service is valid on its face. We utilize substitute service after multiple failed attempts to reach the defendant. California Code of Civil Procedure, Section 415.20 allows for—" The judge raised a hand. He did not look at Sterling. He looked at the file. "I know the code. Counsel," the judge said, "I am looking at the proof of service right now. Ms. Guo has highlighted a specific section for me." He lifted the paper I had marked up downstairs. "It says here the papers were accepted by a Margaret Guo at 402 Maple Street." The judge said. He looked over his glasses at the plaintiff's table. "Which one of you is Margaret Guo?" My mother stood up slowly. She looked small. She looked harmless. "I am, Your Honor," she said softly. The judge looked at her, then back at the document. "You are the plaintiff in this case?" "Correct," he asked. "You are the one suing to evict your daughter?" "Yes, Your Honor," she said. "It breaks our hearts to do it. But stop," the judge said. He cut her off with a single word that snapped like a whip. "I am not asking about your heart. I am asking about your signature. Did you sign this proof of service accepting the papers on behalf of the defendant?" My mother hesitated. She looked at Sterling. Sterling shifted his weight. "Your Honor," Sterling said, "the defendant was evading service. The process server went to the last known address where—" "I am not talking to you." "Counsel," the judge said. He leaned forward. "Mrs. Guo, did you receive the papers meant for your daughter at the Maple Street address?" "Yes," my mother said. Her voice was trembling. But I knew that tremor. It was a performance. It was the address we had on file for her. We just wanted to make sure she got them. We gave them to her later." "That is a lie," I said. The room went silent. I had not meant to interrupt, but the words came out cold and sharp. The judge looked at me. "Your Honor," I said, keeping my voice level, "I have not lived at 402 Maple Street for 15 years. That is an apartment building my parents own. I live at the property in question, 115 Oak Street. I have lived there for 3 years. My parents have visited me there. They know exactly where I live. They had the process server deliver the papers to themselves so I would never see them." Sterling sighed loud enough for the microphone to pick it up. "Your Honor, Ms. Guo has been unstable lately," he said, dropping his voice to a tone of mock sympathy. "She disappears for weeks. She does not answer her phone. My clients were simply trying to follow the law to get notice to her in a difficult situation. This is a family matter that has spiraled out of control because of the defendant's erratic behavior. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. This was their strategy. Paint me as crazy. Paint me as a loose cannon who needed to be managed. I reached into my folder. "I am not unstable, Your Honor," I said, "and I am not hard to find. I have submitted Exhibit A and Exhibit B attached to my motion. These are utility bills and my car registration. They are all addressed to 115 Oak Street. They are dated from last month." The judge flipped the pages in the file. He looked at the bills. He looked at the registration. Then he looked at Sterling. "Counsel," the judge said, his voice dropping an octave, "you are telling me your clients, who claim to be the landlords of the Oak Street property, did not know their tenant lived at the Oak Street property." Sterling opened his mouth, but nothing came out. It was a logical trap. and he had walked right into it. Well, Your Honor, technically the service address was a secondary. It is the wrong address, the judge said, and the person accepting service is a party to the action. That is a fundamental conflict. You cannot serve yourself and call it due process. He grabbed a pen. He wrote something quickly on the order form in front of him. Motion to stay. Execution of the writ of possession is granted, the judge announced. I felt my knees go weak with relief. The sheriff is hereby ordered to stand down. The judge continued. The lockout for 12 noon is canceled. The default judgment is temporarily stayed pending a full hearing on the motion to vacate. My father leaned forward and whispered something angry to Sterling. Sterling looked flushed. Thank you, Your Honor. I said. The judge did not dismiss us. He did not close the file. Instead, he reached for another document, the one the judicial assistant had warned me about. We are not done. The judge said. The room went quiet again. The temperature seemed to drop 5 degrees. While we are here, the judge said, looking at me, I need to address a document that was dropped in the overnight box and processed this morning. It seems to be related to the title of the property. He held up a piece of paper. Even from where I stood, I could see the layout. It was a grant deed. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, your office submitted this. It appears to be a deed transferring the property from Julia Guo to Robert and Margaret Guo. It is dated yesterday. That is correct. Your Honor, Sterling said, regaining some of his confidence. This renders the eviction moot. Actually, the defendant voluntarily signed the property over to her parents yesterday to settle the debt. We were going to withdraw the eviction action once the recording was finalized. I stared at him. The audacity was breathtaking. They were claiming I had given them the house voluntarily. On the same day, they were planning to have the sheriff throw me out of it. Your Honor. I said, that is absolutely false. The judge looked at me. You deny signing this deed? The judge asked. I deny it completely. I said, I have never seen that document before this moment. I did not sign it. I did not authorize it. Yesterday. I was at my office from 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening. I work at a secure facility. I can provide badge logs and camera footage to prove my location. My father spoke up then. He stood, ignoring his lawyer's hand trying to restrain him. She is lying, my father said. His voice was deep, authoritative, the voice he used to command boardrooms. She signed it. She came to the house yesterday afternoon. She was crying. She admitted she could not handle the payments. She signed it in front of a notary. We are just trying to help her before she goes bankrupt. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and disappointment that was so perfectly crafted it almost made me doubt my own memory. Your Honor, my father continued, my daughter is confused. She is under a lot of stress. She forgets things. The judge looked at my father. He studied him for a long moment. Then he looked at the deed again. Who is the notary? The judge asked. Sterling looked at his notes. A Mr. James Thorne, Your Honor. He is an independent mobile notary. The judge looked at the signature block on the deed. Mr. Thorne's commission number is listed here, the judge said. He tapped the paper. He looked back at me. Ms. Guo, you are stating for the record, under penalty of perjury, that you did not appear before Miss Thorne yesterday. I am, Your Honor. I said, I do not know a Mr. Thorne, and yesterday at the time this document was allegedly signed. I was in a meeting with 3 other people at my office in the financial district. I can have those people submit affidavits within the hour. The judge nodded slowly. He turned to Sterling. Counsel, the judge said, this is a very serious situation. We have a writ of possession based on a service that looks highly questionable, and now we have a grant deed that the defendant claims is a total fabrication. Backed by an alibi she says she can prove. He paused. If this deed is valid, the eviction is unnecessary because the parents own the home. If this deed is forged, then we are looking at something that goes far beyond civil court. Sterling tugged at his collar. My clients stand by the validity of the document. Your Honor, Sterling said, but his voice lacked conviction. Very well, the judge said. We are going to get to the bottom of this. and we are going to do it quickly." He checked his calendar. "I am setting an evidentiary hearing for tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. The judge said. He pointed a finger at Sterling. "You will bring the original grant deed," the judge ordered. "Not a copy. The original wet ink document. And you will bring the notary." "Mr. Thorne," Sterling nodded. "And counsel," the judge added, his voice sharpening. "Tell Mr. Thorne to bring his notary journal. I want to see the thumbprint. I want to see the signature entry. If your clients are telling the truth, that journal will prove it." My father's face went rigid. My mother looked down at her lap again, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. I felt a surge of cold triumph. In California, a notary journal is a public record. It requires a thumbprint for any property transfer. If I wasn't there would be no thumbprint, or there would be a fake one. Either way, the journal was the trap, and Ms. Guo. The judge said to me, "Yes, Your Honor, bring your badge logs." The judge said, "Bring your witnesses, and bring your original deed." "I will, Your Honor." The judge banged his gavel. It sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Court stands in recess. The sheriff is ordered to stay the execution immediately." I grabbed my bag. I did not look at my parents. I turned and walked toward the door. As I passed their table, my father hissed at me. It was a low sound, barely audible. "You are making a mistake. Julia, you are destroying this family." I stopped. I turned my head just enough to see him out of the corner of my eye. "The family was destroyed when you forged my name." "Dad," I whispered, "now we are just cleaning up the wreckage." I walked out into the hallway. The air felt lighter. The clock on the wall read 10:15. I had bought myself 24 hours, but as I walked toward the elevators, I replayed the assistant's words in my head. A grant deed. They had tried to steal the house out from under me. This was not just about control anymore. This was desperation. People do not commit felonies unless they are cornered. Why were they so desperate for the house? Why now? I needed to find out, and I had a feeling the answer was not in the court file. I pulled out my phone. I dialed the number for the security office at my workplace. "This is Julia Guo, ID number 492. I said, "I need a favor. I need a full export of my access logs for yesterday, and I need the parking garage camera footage." I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, shutting out the courtroom, the judge, and the parents who had become my enemies. Now, the real investigation began. The first thing I did when the heavy oak doors of Department 42 swung shut behind me was not to celebrate. Celebration is for when the war is over. This was just a ceasefire. I walked briskly to the end of the corridor, finding a quiet alcove near the emergency exit. I pulled the certified copy of the order to stay execution out of my folder. The ink of the judge's signature was still drying, a jagged black line that stood between me and homelessness. I placed the document against the wall and took a photo. I made sure the lighting was even. I made sure the stamp of the court was perfectly legible. Then I opened my email app. I found the card the deputy sheriff had given me that morning, the one that felt like it had been handed to me a lifetime ago. I typed the subject line in all caps. "Urgent. Stay of eviction. Case C, V 249008. I attached the photo. In the body, I wrote a single sentence. "Please confirm receipt and cancellation of the 12 noon lockout immediately." I hit send, then I dialed the number on the card. It went to voicemail. I did not leave a message. I hung up and called the main dispatch line for the civil unit. "Civil unit?" A dispatcher answered. "This is Julia Guo." I said, my voice was clipped, "I just emailed Deputy Miller a court order staying the eviction at 115 Oak Street. The judge has ordered the sheriff to stand down. I need a confirmation code that the dispatch has been canceled." There was a pause. I heard the clicking of a keyboard. "One moment," she said. I waited. I watched the lawyers walking past me. They looked like sharks in expensive suits. I felt like a shark too, but one that had been forced to evolve legs and walk on land. "Okay, I see the order in the system." The dispatcher said, "I have radioed Deputy Miller. The lockout is canceled. You are safe for today." Safe. It was a relative term. "Thank you," I said. I hung up. I did not exhale. I did not let my shoulders drop. I checked the time, 10:30 in the morning. My parents had played a dirty game with the service of process. But the forged deed transferring my house to them, was a different level of criminality. It was sloppy, desperate, and dangerous. And if they were desperate enough to forge a deed, they were desperate enough to try to sell the house or borrow against it before tomorrow morning. I needed to lock down my alibi, and I needed to lock down the title. I called the security office at my workplace, Crestwood Systems Group. We handled sensitive data for healthcare providers. Our physical security was military grade. Security. This is Evans. Hi, Evans. It is Julia Guo from the data analytics team. I said, I need a favor, and I need it to be official. What do you need? Julia, he asked, I need a full export of my physical access logs for yesterday, January 29th. I said, I need the turnstile swipes for the main lobby. I need the badge reader logs for the server room on the 4th floor. And I need the parking garage gate logs showing when my car entered and exited. Evans paused. That is a lot of data. Is everything okay? I am involved in a legal dispute regarding identity theft. I said, I chose the words carefully. Someone is claiming I was in a different location yesterday signing documents. I need to prove I was in the building. Understood, Evans said. His tone shifted from colleague to security professional. Do you have a case number? Yes, I said. I recited the case number. Send me an email with the request and the case number. He said, I will pull the logs and have the director of security sign an affidavit of authenticity. I can have it ready by 2 in the afternoon. Do you need camera footage too? Yes, I said. Please preserve the footage from the lobby cameras between 8 in the morning and 6 in the evening. I might need a court order to release the video file itself, but I need you to flag it so it does not get overwritten in the 48-hour cycle. Done, he said. I hung up and typed the email immediately. I was precise. I did not offer emotional context. I did not say, my parents are trying to steal my house, I wrote. Request for evidentiary support regarding case CV 249008. I sent it. My alibi was now being generated by a server that did not know how to lie. Next stop, the county recorder's office. It was in the basement of the administration building, 2 blocks away from the courthouse. I walked there. The wind had picked up, blowing grit into my eyes, but I barely blinked. The recorder's office was different from the court. It was quieter. It smelled of dust and old vellum. The walls were lined with maps of the county dating back to the 1800s. This was the memory of the city. This was where ownership was defined. I walked up to the counter. There was no line here. How can I help you? The clerk asked. She was a young woman with bright pink nails that clicked against the countertop. I need to see a grant deed that was recorded yesterday. I said, the property is 115 Oak Street, and I need to see the intake metadata. She typed the address, Guo to Guo. She read, recorded yesterday at 4:15 in the afternoon. I nodded. 4:15. At 4:15 yesterday. I was in a budget meeting at Crestwood. I had a witness for that. I need a certified copy of the deed. I said, and I need to know who physically submitted it. Was it e-recorded or walked in? It was a walk-in, she said. She turned the monitor slightly so I could see. Here are the intake notes, she said. Submitted by a runner service. Speedy Legal Couriers. I took a picture of the screen with my phone. Speedy Legal Couriers. That was a paid service. My parents had not even walked it in themselves. They had hired a stranger to carry the lie across the finish line. Can I see the image of the document? Please, I asked. She clicked a button. The scanned image of the deed appeared on the screen. I leaned in. I ignored the text of the transfer. I ignored the fake signature that looked nothing like mine. I focused on the notary block at the bottom right. State of California, County of San Francisco, on January 29th. Before me, James Thorne, Notary Public. Personally appeared Julia Guo. I looked at the notary stamp. It was a standard rubber stamp. James Thorne, commission number 2349918. But then I looked closer at the handwritten part. The notary had to write in his commission expiration date and his commission number next to his signature. There was something wrong with the number. Can you zoom in on the bottom right? I asked. The clerk clicked the mouse. The image expanded. I stared at the screen. The number 8 at the end of the commission number was thick. It looked like it had been written over a different number. It looked like someone had written a 3, realized it was wrong, and tried to turn it into an 8 with a heavy ballpoint pen. The clerk leaned in too. "That is messy," she muttered. "Usually, we reject documents if the notary block is altered. Why wasn't this one rejected?" I asked. She shrugged. It was late in the day, 4:15. The intake clerk probably just wanted to go home, or maybe the runner talked fast. It was a small error, a tiny, human error. But in the world of forensics, it was a canyon. If James Thorne was a legitimate notary, he would know his own commission number. He would not make a mistake and write over it. A mistake like that suggested nervousness, or it suggested that the person holding the pen was not James Thorne. "I need a high-resolution print of this section," I said, "and I need a printout of the intake log showing the time and the courier company." She printed them. The pages were warm when she handed them to me. "I have one more thing," I said. "I want to file a notice of pendency of action." She looked at me. "That is a lis pendens," she said. "You are putting a cloud on the title." "Yes," I said. "I am disputing the validity of this transfer. I want to make sure that if anyone runs a title search on this property in the next 10 minutes, they see a giant red flag telling them it is under litigation." I filled out the form right there at the counter. I attached the case number of the eviction suit. I paid the recording fee. As the clerk stamped my notice, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. My parents might have the deed, but I had just turned it into a piece of paper that no bank or buyer would touch. I had poisoned the well. I left the recorder's office at noon. The sun was high now. The city was bustling with the lunch rush. I felt detached from it all. I was not hungry. I took a cab back to my house. When the taxi pulled up to the curb, I saw them. My parents' car was gone. The street was empty. The house looked exactly as I had left it 6 hours ago. But it did not feel safe. I unlocked the front door. I stepped inside. The air was stale. I walked through every room, checking the windows, checking the closets. Empty. But they had a deed, and they had the audacity to claim I had signed it. That meant they felt comfortable enough to commit a crime that carried a prison sentence. That meant they were not thinking rationally. And irrational people are dangerous. I did not sit down. I went to the garage and got my toolbox. I had changed the locks 6 months ago, but I was going to change them again. I had stopped at a hardware store on the way back and bought high-security deadbolts, the kind with reinforced strike plates and pick-resistant cylinders. I spent the next 2 hours working. The sound of the drill was loud and aggressive. I removed the old locks. I installed the new ones. I drove 3-inch screws into the door jambs, anchoring the strike plates deep into the studs. If they wanted to get in now, they would have to take the wall down with the door. Then I opened the box for the wireless security cameras I had bought. I mounted one above the front door, angled to capture the face of anyone standing on the porch. I mounted one on the back deck. I mounted one on the side of the garage. I synced them to my phone. I set the motion sensitivity to high. I was not doing this because I was paranoid. I was doing this because my parents had proven that they relied on my passivity. They relied on me being the good daughter who would not make a scene. They relied on the privacy of the family home to hide their maneuvers. I was removing the privacy. I was turning my home into a stage where every movement was recorded and uploaded to the cloud. By the time I finished, it was late afternoon. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the living room floor. I sat on the floor in the center of the room, my back against the sofa. My laptop was open in front of me. I had the digital files from the court, the photos of the deed, the email from Evans at Crestwood. I was building the timeline. 8 in the morning. I arrive at Crestwood. Badge swipe. 9:30 in the morning. Notary. James Thorne allegedly meets me. Where? The deed did not say where. The venue said San Francisco County. 4:15 in the afternoon. Deed recorded by Speedy Legal Couriers. 6 in the evening. I leave Crestwood. Parking gate log. The timeline was a fortress. There was no way to breach it. My phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. It was 8:30 at night. The number was unknown. It was not my parents. It was not the court. I picked it up. I did not answer. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, a text message arrived from the same number. I opened it. The text was short. "You are playing a dangerous game. Some things should stay in the family. Withdraw the motion or the next set of papers will be much worse." I stared at the words. It was vague. It was menacing. It was designed to scare me into compliance. I did not reply. I did not ask, "Who is this?" I took a screenshot. I saved the image to the folder named case_CV249008_defense. Then I forwarded the screenshot to my own email. Then I opened a new document and started a log for harassment and intimidation. Entry 1, January 30th, 8:32 p.m. Text message from unknown number. Content implies threat of retaliation for legal action. I was not scared. Fear is a reaction to the unknown. This was known. This was a bully realizing that the victim had picked up a brick. I looked at the camera feed on my phone. The street outside was dark and quiet. The infrared light on the front porch camera glowed softly. Let them come, I thought. Let them send their texts. Let them send their runners. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I was going to introduce them to the concept of perjury. And I was going to do it with a smile as cold as the one they gave me this morning. The sun rose at 6:30, bringing with it a pale, watery light that washed over the street. I had not slept. I had spent the night monitoring the feed from my new security cameras, watching the empty sidewalk, waiting for the next move. At 7:15, the move arrived. A car pulled up to the curb. It was not a patrol car this time. It was my parents' sedan. They parked in the exact same spot the deputy sheriff had occupied 25 hours earlier. They stepped out, not with the hurried, guilty movements of criminals, but with the casual, confident air of people arriving for Sunday brunch. My mother smoothed her coat. My father adjusted his collar. They walked up the driveway, past the hydrangeas I had planted, and stepped onto the porch. They did not know about the new cameras. They did not see the small black lens nestled in the eaves above the door. I picked up my phone. The screen showed them in high definition. I could see the lines around my mother's mouth. I could see the impatience in my father's eyes. My father reached out and knocked. 3 solid raps. "Julia," he called out. His voice was muffled through the heavy door, but the microphone on the camera picked it up clearly. "Open up. We need to have a family talk." I stood in the hallway, 10 feet from the door. I did not move to unlock it. The deadbolts I had installed yesterday were engaged. The steel strike plates were holding firm. I tapped the microphone icon on my phone app. My voice would project through the doorbell speaker. "Go away," I said. My mother flinched. She looked around, trying to find the source of the voice. My father glared at the door. "Stop acting like a child." "Julia," he said, "we are not here to fight. We are here to resolve this before it gets ugly in court tomorrow." "Open the door." "I am not opening the door." I said. The digital distortion of the speaker made my voice sound metallic. "Inhuman. You sued me. You tried to evict me. That is not a family matter anymore. That is a legal matter." My father stepped closer to the wood. He lowered his voice, trying to sound reasonable, the way one speaks to a frightened animal or a slow employee. "We did what we had to do," he said. "You are not capable of managing an asset of this size. We need to keep the house in adult hands. We are trying to protect the family equity, adult hands." The phrase hung in the air, vibrating with condescension. I was 38 years old. I managed databases for a Fortune 500 company. I paid my own mortgage, but to him, I was still a toddler playing with blocks, and he was the benevolent parent stepping in to put the toys away. I felt a cold flash of anger, but I let it pass. I needed them to keep talking. Every word was being recorded. "So that is the reason?" I asked. "You think I am incompetent. We think you are overwhelmed," my mother chimed in. Her voice was shrill. "You are alone, Julia. You have no husband. You have no backup. What if you lose your job? What if you get sick? We are just securing the future, and that justifies forgery. I asked. The silence that followed was heavy. My father stiffened. My mother looked at him. They did not answer immediately. They had prepared scripts for concern and instability, but they had not prepared a script for the direct accusation of a felony. Why did you fake the service of process? I pressed. Why did you forge my signature on a deed? If you are so righteous, why did you have to lie to a judge? My father's face turned a shade of red I recognized from my childhood. It was the color of losing control. We did not forge anything. He snapped. You signed it. You are confused. And if you keep pushing this, Julia, you are going to regret it. The court will see that you are mentally unwell. We will make sure of it. That is a threat. I said, and it is recorded. Get off my property. My father raised his fist as if to pound on the door again, then stopped. He realized he was shouting at a piece of wood. He realized the neighbors might be watching. He adjusted his jacket. He grabbed my mother's arm. We will see you tomorrow, he hissed. And bring your checkbook. You are going to owe us for the legal fees. They turned and walked back to the car. I watched them go on the screen. They looked smaller than they had yesterday. Yesterday, they were giants wielding the power of the state. Today, they were just two angry old people who had been locked out by a daughter they underestimated. I saved the video clip. I named it evidence_harassment_January_31. My phone chimed. An email notification. It was from Evans at Crestwood Security. Subject: Access Logs Request. Case C V 249008. I opened it immediately. Attached was a PDF file and a sworn affidavit signed by the Director of Security. I opened the PDF. It was a beautiful wall of data. Row 1, date, January 29th, time, 0814, user, Julia Guo, ID, 492, type, badge in, location, main lobby. Turnstile, row 2, date, January 29th, time, 0816, user, Julia Guo, type, badge in, location, Elevator Bank B, row 3, date, January 29th. Time, 12:30, user, Julia Guo, type, badge in, location, cafeteria. Row 4, date, January 29th, time, 1805, user, Julia Guo, type, badge out, location, parking garage. Gate 3. I scanned the hours between 8 and 6. There were badge swipes for the restroom, badge swipes for the server room, badge swipes for the break room. There was no gap longer than 45 minutes to sign a deed in front of a notary. I would have had to leave the building, travel to the notary, sign, and travel back. Even if the notary came to me, he would have had to sign in as a visitor. I checked the visitor logs attached at the bottom. No James Thorne, no Robert Guo, no Margaret Guo. This document was an ironclad alibi. It proved that when the deed was allegedly being signed and notarized, I was sitting at my desk analyzing data packets. But I needed more. I needed to connect the forgery directly to them, not just prove I wasn't there. I went back to the photos I had taken at the recorder's office. I pulled up the image of the intake notes, submitted by Speedy Legal Couriers. I minimized the photo and opened a browser tab. I searched for Speedy Legal Couriers. It was a local messenger service, the kind law firms use to file papers at the last minute. I called their main number, Speedy Legal. Dispatch, hi. I said, I am calling regarding a filing that was dropped off at the recorder's office yesterday. I am the client, and I need to confirm the billing reference. My accountant is asking for it. Do you have the tracking number? The dispatcher asked. No, I said, but the recording number is 20240091118. It was a grant deed, recorded at 4:15 p.m. 1 second. Let me look up the run. I held my breath. Social engineering was not my forte, but I sounded tired and annoyed, which usually worked with administrative staff. Okay, I found it. The dispatcher said. Run number 5592. Pickup was at 2 p.m. Drop off at recorder. Can you tell me whose account that was billed to? I asked. I want to make sure it didn't get charged to the wrong file. It was billed to account 409. She said, Law Office of Harold Sterling. Sterling. The breath I was holding rushed out. My parents' lawyer. Perfect, I said. And just for my records, was the pickup at the law office or a different location? Pickup was at the law office. She said, 101 Market Street. Thank you so much. I said. I hung up. This was the smoking gun. My parents and their lawyer claimed I had signed the deed in front of a mobile notary named James Thorne, but the courier picked up the document directly from Sterling's office. That meant the document was likely created, signed, and notarized right there in the lawyer's office, without me ever being present. James Thorne wasn't a mobile notary meeting me at a coffee shop. James Thorne was likely an employee of Harold Sterling, or a notary. Sterling used for dirty work. They had manufactured the deed in their office and paid a runner to rush it to the recorder before the ink was dry. I added this to my timeline. 2 p.m. Courier picks up forged deed from Sterling's office. 4:15 p.m. Deed recorded. Now I had to protect the house from the fallout of that deed, even if I proved it was fake tomorrow. Right now, the public record said my parents owned it. I called a company called Guardian Title. They were a massive title insurance firm. I asked for the fraud department. Guardian Title, fraud unit. Agent Miller speaking. My name is Julia Guo. I said, I suspect a fraudulent deed has been recorded against my property. I have already filed a lis pendens and a police report is pending. I need to place a hard lock on any title inquiries. Do you have a policy with us? Miller asked. Yes, I said. I pulled my closing papers from the fireproof bag. Policy number 72918. I see it. Miller said. What is the nature of the fraud? Family identity theft. I said. A grant deed was recorded yesterday transferring title to my parents without my consent. I am in litigation right now to vacate it. I want to make sure no loans are taken out against the equity in the meantime. I understand. Miller said. I am placing a do not insure flag on the property effective immediately. If any lender tries to open a line of credit or any buyer tries to open escrow, it will trigger a red alert and they will be directed to call me. We will not issue title insurance on any transaction until this flag is removed by you in person. Thank you. I said. That stopped them from cashing out. If they tried to get a hard money loan or flip the house to an unsuspecting buyer, the deal would die instantly. I looked at the clock. 11 a.m. I had the alibi. I had the connection to the lawyer. I had the title locked. Now I needed to deal with the threat. I called the civil unit again. I asked for the deputy who had come to my door yesterday. He was on patrol, but I got his voicemail. Deputy, this is Julia Guo. Thank you for respecting the stay order. I am calling to report that I have received threatening text messages from an unknown number regarding this case. I also have video footage of the plaintiffs coming to my home this morning and attempting to intimidate me. I am requesting that this report be added to the case file for the hearing tomorrow. I will bring copies of the screenshots and the video. I hung up and then called the non-emergency police line to file a separate report for harassment. I got a case number 44911. I wrote it down on a sticky note and slapped it onto the folder. The rest of the day was a blur of preparation. I did not eat lunch. I drank water and paced the living room floor. My parents thought they were fighting a daughter. They thought they were fighting someone who would cry and ask, why? They did not realize they were fighting a systems analyst. My entire career was built on finding patterns in data, identifying anomalies, and patching security holes. They had introduced a virus into my life, and I was methodically isolating it, analyzing its code, and preparing to delete it. When the sun went down, I closed the blinds, I turned on the lights in the dining room, I cleared the table and laid everything out. It looked like a war room. Pile 1, the stay order, the shield. Pile 2, the proof of service with the highlighted forgery, the initial weapon. Pile 3, the Crestwood security logs, the alibi. Pile 4, the recorder's office metadata and the notes about the courier, the link to the lawyer. Pile 5. The photos of the notary block with the altered commission number, the technical flaw. Pile 6. The text message and the video of the morning confrontation, the character evidence. I opened a fresh manila folder. I labeled it Hearing Exhibits. I arranged the documents in logical order. I was telling a story. Chapter 1. The Fake Eviction. Chapter 2. The Fake Deed. Chapter 3. The Real Location of the Defendant. Chapter 4. The Conspiracy between the plaintiffs and their counsel. I placed the original, valid deed, the one I had retrieved from my safe, on top of the stack. It was the anchor. I sat back. The house was quiet. The new locks were solid. The cameras were watching. I was not waiting for a miracle. Miracles were unreliable. I was relying on the one thing my parents had underestimated. The truth, when properly documented, is heavier than any lie. I looked at the text message one last time. Withdraw the motion or the next set of papers will be much worse. I deleted the screenshot from my phone gallery because it was already backed up in 3 different clouds. There would be no next set of papers. I thought, tomorrow. I was going to make sure that the only paper they signed was a confession. I went to my bedroom. I laid out my clothes for court. A dark navy suit, a white blouse, sensible heels. I would not look like a victim. I would look like a prosecutor. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. I lay down in bed, but I kept my phone on the nightstand. The camera app open. I watched the gray feed of the empty street. They wanted to take my time. They wanted to take my home. Tomorrow. I was going to take their reputation, and I was going to do it on the public record. The silence of my house was usually a comfort, but as the afternoon sun stretched across the living room floor, a different kind of silence began to bother me. It was the silence of the mailbox. I sat at my dining table, the war room I had constructed from stacks of paper and digital evidence. I looked at the timeline I was building. There was a gap, a procedural hole that did not make sense. Even with the fraudulent substitute service at the Maple Street apartment, the court clerk is required by law to mail a copy of the summons and complaint to the physical address of the eviction. It is a fail-safe, a backup warning sent via the United States Postal Service. If the court had mailed it to 115 Oak Street, I should have received it 3 weeks ago. I should have seen an envelope with the Superior Court return address. I would have opened it. I would have fought this then, but I never saw it. I stood up and walked to the front window. I watched the mail carrier's truck roll down the street. It stopped at the neighbor's house. It stopped at the house across from me. Then it drove past my driveway without slowing down. I realized then that I had not received a single piece of mail in over 2 weeks. No bills, no flyers, no credit card offers. I grabbed my purse and my keys. I drove to the main post office branch on 4th Street. It was 4:30 in the afternoon. The line was long. But I had patience. Patience is a weapon when you are hunting for a paper trail. When I reached the counter, I placed my driver's license on the laminate surface. I am not receiving mail at my residence. I said, I need to know if there is a hold or a forwarding order on file for Julia Guo at 115 Oak Street. The clerk typed my address into his terminal. He frowned. Yes, ma'am, he said. We have a temporary forwarding order on file. It was submitted on January 5th. January 5th, 5 days before the lawsuit was filed. They had blinded me before they even fired the first shot. Where is the mail being forwarded to? I asked. The clerk turned the screen slightly. 402 Maple Street, apartment 4B. He read. I felt a cold, hard knot tighten in my stomach. It was the apartment they owned, the same address where my mother had signed for the lawsuit. They were not just intercepting the court papers. They were intercepting everything, my bank statements, my tax documents, any warning letters from the county recorder. Can I see the request form? I asked. The clerk hesitated. I need to see the signature. I said, if I did not sign it, this is mail fraud. That is a federal crime. He printed a copy of the scanned request card. I looked at the signature block. It was a scribble. It looked vaguely like my name. But the slant was wrong. It matched the forgery on the lease. It matched the forgery on the deed. It was the same hand. I need to file a fraud report, I said, and I need to cancel this order immediately. I filled out the forms with a shaking hand. I was not shaking from fear. I was shaking from the sheer scale of the violation. They had stolen my identity. They had stolen my property rights, and they had stolen my mail to ensure I stayed in the dark until the sheriff arrived. I left the post office with a certified copy of the fraudulent change of address form. I added it to my evidence folder. This was Exhibit G. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw my neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, watering her lawn. She was a retiree who spent most of her day watching the street. She was the neighborhood watch in a floral print dress. I walked over to the fence. "Hi, Mrs. Higgins," I said. "Oh, hello, Julia," she said, lowering her hose. "I have not seen you much lately. I have been working a lot." I said, "I wanted to ask you something. Have you seen anyone around my mailbox in the last few weeks?" Her face brightened with recognition. "Well, yes," she said. "Your parents. They have been stopping by quite a bit." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Really?" I asked. "When? Oh, usually in the mornings," she said. "Your father told me you were having some trouble with your work schedule and that he was helping you pick up your mail so it would not pile up. Such a nice man. He waves every time. He was stealing my mail." "Mrs. Higgins," I said quietly. Her smile faltered. "Oh," she said. "Oh my. Would you be willing to write that down for me?" I asked. "Just a short statement saying you saw them removing mail from my box." She looked nervous. "People hate to get involved. It is for court tomorrow." I said, "They are trying to take my house. They told the judge I abandoned it. If you saw them taking my mail, it proves they knew I was here and they were hiding the notices from me." She looked at my face. She saw the exhaustion and the determination. "I will write it," she said. "I do not like liars, and I certainly do not like people who tamper with mail." My husband was a postal worker for 30 years. Half an hour later, I had a handwritten statement from Mrs. Higgins, signed and dated. I went inside and checked my email. There was a notification from the court's electronic filing system. I had set up an alert on the case number the moment I got home yesterday. A new document had been filed by Harold Sterling. Supplemental declaration in support of opposition to motion to vacate. I opened the PDF. It was 5 pages long. It was a work of fiction designed to paint me as a ghost. Sterling had attached a log of communication attempts. Item 1, January 10th, phone call to defendant, left voicemail. Item 2, January 12th, email to defendant regarding lease violation. Item 3, January 15th, text message to defendant asking for meeting. He was trying to prove diligent effort. He was trying to show the judge that I was avoiding them, justifying their use of substitute service. I opened my own phone logs. I pulled up the dates. January 10th, no missed calls, no voicemails. I looked at the email log Sterling had attached. The recipient address was listed as julia.guo@gmail.net. My email was .com. They had deliberately sent the emails to a non-existent domain so they would bounce back, or simply vanish into the ether, just so they could print the sent folder and show it to a judge. "Look, Your Honor," we tried. I opened a new document on my laptop. I started drafting my response. Response to plaintiff's supplemental declaration. I imported my phone carrier's official call logs. They showed 0 incoming calls from my parents' numbers on the dates listed. I took a screenshot of the email header in Sterling's exhibit. I circled the .net with a red digital marker. I wrote a caption underneath. Plaintiffs attempted to notify defendant via an email address that does not exist. This demonstrates a calculated effort to manufacture a paper trail of diligence while ensuring no actual communication occurred. They were building a narrative that I was unstable, erratic, and impossible to reach. They were banking on the judge thinking, well, where there is smoke, there is fire. I was going to show the judge that the smoke was coming from a smoke machine they had rented. I worked through the evening. The sun went down, and the house grew dark, but I kept the lights low. I did not want them to see me moving around. At 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed. It was a news alert, but it reminded me of the text I had received the night before. The threat. Withdraw the motion, or the next set of papers will be much worse. I looked at the video clip from this morning, my father's face, red with anger, telling me I was mentally unwell and that they would make sure the court saw it. They were going to try to put me under a conservatorship. That was the next set of papers. That was why they needed the narrative of instability. If they could convince a judge I was incompetent, they could take control of everything. My house, my bank accounts, my life. The eviction was just the opening move. The end game was total erasure of my autonomy. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. This was not just greed. This was predation. I opened the folder for the restraining order forms. Request for civil harassment. Restraining order. I filled in the boxes. Name of person to be restrained. Robert Guo. Name of person to be restrained. Margaret Guo. Relationship. Parents. In the section for description of harassment, I referenced the text message. I referenced the verbal threat recorded on my doorbell camera. I referenced the mail theft. I am afraid that if I do not give them my property, they will escalate to physical confrontation or false imprisonment via a fraudulent mental health hold. I printed the forms. I would file them tomorrow, right after the hearing on the deed. Finally, I pulled out a fresh legal pad. It was time to synthesize everything. A judge does not have time to read a novel. A judge needs a map. I wrote timeline of fraud across the top of the page. I needed to show the rhythm of their lies versus the rhythm of the truth. Truth has a heartbeat. It is consistent. Lies stumble. They overlap. They contradict. 0900. January 5th. Postal forwarding order submitted. Signature forged. Purpose: blind the victim. 0900. January 10th. Lawsuit filed. 0900. January 10th. Process server allegedly knocks on my door. Truth: I was home. No knock. 0900. January 20th. Substitute service accepted by Margaret Guo at 402 Maple. Truth: self-service. 0900. January 26th. Default judgment entered. 1615. January 29th. Grant deed recorded. Truth: I was at work. Courier logs show pickup from Sterling's office. 0603. January 30th. Sheriff lockout attempted. It was a cascade. Once you saw it laid out, you could not unsee it. It was a criminal enterprise operating under the guise of family concern. I organized my binders. I had 3 identical sets, one for the judge, one for Sterling, one for me. Binder 1. The eviction fraud. Binder 2. The deed fraud. Binder 3. The character attacks and rebuttal. I placed the Postal Service investigation form in Binder 1. I placed Mrs. Higgins' statement in Binder 1. I placed the email domain error screenshot in Binder 3. I stood up and stretched. My back ached. My eyes burned. But my mind was clear. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The streetlight flickered. My parents were probably sleeping soundly in their large, expensive house. They probably thought they had this handled. They had a lawyer. They had a notary. They had the narrative of the troubled daughter. They thought tomorrow would be a formality. They thought I would stutter and cry and look crazy. They did not know I had the mail logs. They did not know I had the courier dispatch number. They did not know I had Mrs. Higgins. They were bringing a story to court. I was bringing an autopsy of their crime. I went to the kitchen and drank a glass of water. I checked the locks on the doors one last time. I went to bed, but I set my alarm for 5 in the morning. I wanted to be the first person in line when the courthouse opened. I wanted to be sitting at the counsel table with my binders perfectly aligned before they even walked through the door. There is a difference between "I do not know what happened" and "I can prove exactly what you did." Tomorrow, I was going to teach them that difference, and the lesson was going to cost them everything. The bailiff called the case at exactly 9 in the morning, Guo versus Guo, case number CV 249008. Evidentiary hearing on motion to vacate. Default and related title issues. I stood up. My binders were arranged in a perfect semicircle on the counsel table. To my right, at the plaintiff's table, my parents sat stiffly. My father was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than my first car. My mother was wearing pearls. They looked like the pillars of the community they pretended to be. Beside them, Harold Sterling, their lawyer, was arranging his own papers, but his hands were moving a little too fast. He looked like a man who had realized the bridge he was building was made of balsa wood. Judge Holloway entered the courtroom. The room shuffled to its feet. He took the bench, adjusted his glasses, and looked down at us. There was no pleasantry in his expression. There was only the heavy, bureaucratic weight of the law. We are here to determine the validity of a grant deed recorded on January 29th, the judge said. His voice echoed in the high-ceilinged room. If the deed is valid, the eviction is moot, because the plaintiffs own the property. If the deed is invalid, then we have a very different conversation to have. He looked at Sterling. Counsel, do you have the original wet ink deed and the notary present as ordered? Yes, Your Honor, Sterling said. He stood up and gestured to the back of the room. I called James Thorne to the stand. The heavy doors at the back opened. A man walked in. James Thorne did not look like a conspirator. He looked like a man who was having the worst morning of his life. He was in his 40s, balding, wearing a suit that was slightly too large for him. He carried a thick, leather-bound book against his chest like a shield. He walked to the witness stand, took the oath, and sat down. He did not look at me. He did not look at the judge. He looked at a spot on the carpet about 3 feet in front of him. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, give me the deed. Sterling handed the document to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. Holloway put on his reading glasses. He examined the paper. He ran his thumb over the signature. Then he looked at Thorne. Mr. Thorne, the judge said, did you notarize this document? Thorne cleared his throat. Yes, Your Honor. And did the defendant, Julia Guo, appear before you personally on January 29th to sign this document? The judge asked. Thorne shifted in his chair. Yes, Your Honor. The judge leaned back. He opened his hand. Let me see your journal. Thorne hesitated. He looked at Sterling. Sterling stared straight ahead. Thorne handed the book to the bailiff. The judge opened the journal. The pages crinkled in the silence. He flipped through the entries until he found the date. January 29th. Here we are, the judge said. Entry 14, grant deed, 115 Oak Street, signed by Julia Guo. He looked up at Thorne. The law requires you to verify the identity of the signer using a government-issued ID. The judge said, read me the details of the ID you recorded for Ms. Guo. Thorne leaned into the microphone. He was sweating. I could see the sheen on his forehead under the courtroom lights. Driver's license. Thorne read from his own notes. Number D1922485. Expiration date, June 12, 2028. The judge looked at me. Ms. Guo. The judge said, please approach the bench and hand the bailiff your driver's license. I walked forward. My legs were steady. I pulled my license from my pocket and handed it to the bailiff. The bailiff handed it to the judge. Holloway looked at the plastic card. Then he looked at the journal. Then he looked at the card again. For the record, the judge stated, his voice flat and dangerous, the defendant's California driver's license number ends in 810. The expiration date is March 4th, 2029. The room went dead silent. The number in your journal does not match the defendant's ID. The judge said to Thorne, in fact, it does not even match the format of a standard California license issued in the last 5 years. Thorne blinked rapidly. I must have written it down wrong. Your Honor, it was busy. I might have transposed the numbers. Transposed? The judge repeated. You transposed every single digit and the expiration date. That is quite a clerical error. The judge turned a page in the journal. And the signature. The judge said, he looked at the scrawl in the journal column. Then he looked at the signature on my declaration, which was in the court file. He held the 2 documents up, side by side, facing the courtroom. One of these is sharp, angular, and slants to the left, the judge said. The other is loopy, round, and slants to the right. Mr. Thorne, are you telling me the woman sitting at that table signed this book? Thorne looked at me for the first time. His eyes were wide, panicked. Yes, he said. I think so. She looks like the person who was there. You think so? The judge asked. I stood up. Your Honor, I said, I have evidence to submit regarding my location on January 29th. I handed a folder to the bailiff. These are the certified access logs from my workplace. Crestwood Systems Group. I said, they are accompanied by a sworn affidavit from the Director of Security. The judge took the folder. He opened it. He ran his finger down the columns of data I had memorized the night before. According to this, the judge read, Ms. Guo badged into her secure office building at 8:14 in the morning. She did not leave the premises until 18:05 in the evening. There is no gap in her presence longer than 45 minutes. The judge looked at the timestamp on the deed. Mr. Thorne, the judge said, what time did this signing take place? Thorne looked at his journal. 2:30 in the afternoon, Your Honor. The judge looked at the log. At 2:30 in the afternoon, Ms. Guo was badging into the 4th floor server room. The judge said, unless she has the ability to teleport, she was not with you. Sterling stood up abruptly. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. Your Honor, Sterling said, his voice pitched high. This is becoming a trial on the facts. We are here on a procedural motion. If there is a dispute about the title, this needs to be moved to the general civil calendar. This is a quiet title issue. It requires discovery. It requires depositions. We request that the court transfer this matter and vacate the current hearing. I saw what he was doing. He was trying to stop the bleeding. He wanted to get his clients out of this room, bury the case in months of paperwork, and hope I ran out of money or energy. Sit down. Counsel. The judge barked. Sterling froze. I am not transferring this, the judge said. This is not a title dispute. This is a question of whether a fraud is being perpetrated on this court right now. I have a notary public whose records do not match reality. I have a defendant with an ironclad alibi. And I have 2 plaintiffs who are sitting very quietly while their lawyer tries to shuffle the deck. The judge turned his full attention back to James Thorne. Mr. Thorne, the judge said, I'm going to remind you of something. Perjury is a felony. Filing a false public document is a felony. Conspiracy to defraud is a felony. Thorne was trembling now. He gripped the edge of the witness stand. If you lie to me, the judge said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a shout, I will refer you to the district attorney's office before you leave this building. Now, I will ask you one more time. Did Julia Guo sign that book? Thorne looked at the judge. Then, involuntary, his eyes darted. He looked at the plaintiff's table. He looked directly at my father. My father was staring at him, his face a mask of rigid, furious tension. My mother was looking at the floor. The judge saw the look. He saw the connection. Let the record show the witness is looking at the plaintiff, Robert Guo. For direction, the judge said. Thorne snapped his head back to the judge. I didn't. Did she sign it? Mr. Thorne, the judge demanded. Yes or no? Thorne crumbled. It was physical. His shoulders slumped. The air went out of him. No, he whispered. Speak up, the judge commanded. No, Thorne said, his voice cracking. She wasn't there. A collective gasp went through the room. Even the other lawyers waiting for their cases stopped checking their phones and looked up. Then how did the signature get in your book? The judge asked. They brought it to me already signed, Thorne said. He gestured vaguely toward my parents. Mr. Sterling called me. He said it was a rush. He said the daughter was busy and couldn't make it. But the parents vouched for the signature. He said it was a family transfer. Just a formality. I've done work for Mr. Sterling for 10 years. I thought it was okay. Sterling closed his eyes. He knew his career had just hit a wall. So you notarized a signature you did not witness, the judge said, and you fabricated the ID details in your journal to cover it up. Thorne nodded. I just wrote down numbers. I didn't think anyone would check. The judge looked at Sterling. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, you are an officer of the court. You suborned perjury. You facilitated the recording of a forged instrument. Your Honor, Sterling stammered. I had no knowledge. I relied on my client's representation that, save it for the state bar. The judge said. I raised my hand. Your Honor. I said. The judge looked at me. His expression was softer now, almost respectful. Yes, Ms. Guo, I have one more document to submit regarding the timeline. I said. I pulled out the intake sheet from the recorder's office. Exhibit D. Mr. Thorne says he notarized this at 2:30. I said, but according to the recorder's office intake metadata, the deed was submitted for recording at 4:15. It was delivered by a runner from Speedy Legal Couriers. I handed the paper to the bailiff. The intake notes show the billing account for the courier. I continued. It was billed to the law office of Harold Sterling, and the dispatch log shows the runner picked up the document from Mr. Sterling's office at 2 o'clock. The judge took the paper. He looked at the timestamp. 2 o'clock. The judge said. He looked at Thorne. You said you notarized it at 2:30. The judge said. But the courier picked it up at 2, which means the document was already in the courier's bag before you even put your stamp on it. Or more likely, you stamped it in Mr. Sterling's office before 2. And you are lying about the time, too. Thorne put his head in his hands. The judge looked at the intake note. It was billed to Mr. Sterling. The judge read. So the lawyer paid the runner to record the forged deed that the lawyer's notary stamped without the signer present. The judge took off his glasses. He placed them on the bench. He looked at my parents, Mr. and Mrs. Guo. The judge said, you filed an eviction based on false service. You manufactured a default judgment. When that looked like it might fail, you forged a deed to steal the property outright. You utilized your attorney and his notary to facilitate this theft. My father stood up. He was shaking. It is our house, he shouted. His voice was raw, stripping away the veneer of the respectable patriarch. We paid for her education. We raised her. She owes us. She has no right to shut us out. We were just taking back what belongs to the family. Sit down, the bailiff yelled, moving toward him. My father ignored him. He pointed a finger at me. You ungrateful child, he screamed. You think you are so smart with your papers. You are nothing without us. Nothing. The judge banged his gavel. Bam, bam, bam. That is enough. The judge roared. The room fell silent. My father stood there, chest heaving, his face a ruin of entitlement and rage. My mother was weeping silently, not for me, but for the shame of being exposed. I looked at them. I did not feel small. I did not feel like a child. I felt like the person who owned the building they were trying to burn down, Your Honor. I said quietly, I request that the default judgment be vacated immediately. I request that the writ of possession be recalled. And I request that the court refer this matter to the district attorney. The judge looked at me. He nodded. Motion to vacate default judgment is granted, he said. The case is dismissed with prejudice. The writ is dissolved. He turned to the court clerk. Madam Clerk, secure all exhibits, especially the notary journal and the original deed. Do not let them leave this courtroom. He turned to the bailiff. Take Mr. Thorne into custody for contempt of court, pending charges for perjury. The judge ordered, and detain Mr. Sterling and the plaintiffs until the sheriff's deputies arrive. I am issuing a bench warrant for their arrest on suspicion of forgery, filing false documents, and conspiracy. Sterling's face went gray. My mother let out a sob. My father slumped into his chair, the fight finally draining out of him as the reality of handcuffs approached. I stood there, watching the machinery of the system turn. It was grinding them up. They had tried to use the law as a weapon, thinking it was a blunt instrument they could swing at their daughter. They forgot that the law is actually a scalpel, and if you hold it by the wrong end, it cuts you. I gathered my binders. I closed the folder labeled Evidence. I looked at my father one last time as the deputy moved behind him to zip-tie his hands. He looked at me, his eyes full of confusion. He still didn't understand how he had lost. He thought he was the authority. He thought he was the law. He was wrong. The law was the paper in my bag, and the paper said I won. The sound of the judge's gavel hitting the mahogany block was not loud, but it felt like the closing of a heavy steel door. It was the sound of finality. It was the sound of a story ending, not with a bang, but with a stamp. Judge Holloway did not look at my parents as he spoke. He looked at the court clerk, his voice devoid of any emotion, which made his words even more devastating. The court hereby vacates the default judgment entered on January 26th. He dictated, "The writ of possession is dissolved immediately. The case for unlawful detainer is dismissed with prejudice due to lack of standing and fraudulent service of process." He turned a page in the file, the sound crisp in the silent courtroom. Regarding the grant deed recorded on January 29th, the court finds substantial evidence of fraud, perjury, and forgery. I am ordering the clerk to transmit the original deed, the notary journal, and the hearing transcript to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. My mother let out a small, strangled sound, like a bird flying into a window. My father remained frozen, his face a mask of gray shock. The judge continued, "I am also issuing a court order to the county recorder. A notice of pending action and a fraud alert will be permanently attached to the chain of title for the property at 115 Oak Street. No further transfers, liens, or encumbrances are to be recorded on this property without a hearing in this courtroom and my personal signature." He looked at me then. "Ms. Guo, you may step down. The system failed you initially, but the record has been corrected. You are the sole legal owner of your home." "Thank you, Your Honor." I said. I did not smile. I did not pump my fist. I simply nodded. The judge looked at the bailiff. "Clear the courtroom. Mr. Sterling, you and your clients are to remain here until the paperwork for the referral is generated. You are having a very bad day. Counsel, do not make it worse by leaving before I dismiss you." I gathered my binders. I stacked them neatly into my canvas bag. I picked up the certified copies of the minute order the clerk handed me, the paper shield that was now harder than diamond. I turned and walked up the aisle. I pushed through the heavy double doors into the hallway. The air out here was cooler. It smelled of floor wax and coffee, not the sweat of desperation. A moment later, the doors opened behind me. Harold Sterling came out, gripping my parents by the elbows. He was moving fast, his face pale and slick with sweat. He was not acting like their lawyer anymore. He was acting like a man trying to distance himself from a radioactive isotope. My father saw me. He tried to stop. He tried to pull his arm free from Sterling's grip. "Julia," he rasped. His voice was cracked, broken. "We need to talk. You do not understand. We can fix this. If you just drop the criminal complaint, we can—" Sterling jerked him forward. It was a violent, panicked motion. "Shut up, Robert," Sterling hissed. He did not care who heard him. "Do not say another word to her. Do not look at her. You are already looking at 5 years for the forgery. Do not add witness tampering to the list. We are leaving. Now." My mother looked at me as she was dragged past. Her eyes were wide and terrified. She looked at me as if I were a stranger who had just mugged her. Rather than the daughter whose identity she had tried to steal, I did not say anything. I did not look away. I watched them. I watched them being hurried down the corridor, their dignity dragging on the floor behind them. They looked small. They looked old. They looked like what they were, criminals who had been caught because they were arrogant enough to think they owned the truth. I turned and walked toward the elevators. I had work to do. I took a cab straight to the title company. I met with the fraud specialist, Agent Miller. I handed him the certified copy of the judge's order. I handed him the new notice of pending action. "Lock it down," I said. Miller typed into his system. "It is done. Miss Guo," he said. "The title is flagged in the national database. If anyone tries to sell this house, refinance it, or even take out a Home Depot credit card against the equity, the system will scream. Your parents cannot touch it. No one can touch it but you." "Thank you," I said. From there, I went to the Sheriff's Department Civil Division. I did not go to the eviction window. I went to the restraining order window. I filed the request for civil harassment restraining order. I had prepared the night before. I attached the police report number for the text threats. I attached the transcript of the hearing where the judge confirmed the fraud. The clerk stamped it. "The temporary order is granted," she said. "The sheriff will serve them. No contact. No coming within 100 yards of your home or workplace. No third-party communication." It was just paper. But in my world, paper was iron. I went home. The house was quiet. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky, casting long rectangles of gold across the hardwood floors. I locked the door behind me. I engaged the new deadbolts. I checked the camera feed. The street was empty. I walked to the kitchen counter. There was a stack of mail there. The mail I had retrieved from the post office hold yesterday. In the chaos of the hearing preparation, I had not opened it. I sorted through it. Bills, flyers, and one thick, cream-colored envelope with a return address in New York. The law offices of Weber and Fields. Estate administration. I frowned. That was my grandmother's estate firm. My grandmother had passed away 3 years ago. Her estate was settled. I had used my inheritance to buy this house. I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter addressed to me. "Dear Ms. Guo, we are writing to you in your capacity as the primary beneficiary of the Eleanor Guo Trust. As you know, under the terms of the trust, your parents, Robert and Margaret Guo, were granted a lifetime stipend of $4,000 per month, contingent upon certain conditions of conduct set forth by your late grandmother." I paused. I knew about the stipend. It was the only reason my parents had not fought the will harder. They got a monthly check to keep them comfortable. I continued reading. Clause 14. Section B of the trust agreement serves as a non-contestability and non-aggression covenant. It states that if any secondary beneficiary attempts to legally challenge, defraud, or otherwise undermine the financial security of the primary beneficiary, you, their interest in the trust shall be immediately forfeited and returned to the principal. My heart stopped for a beat. We have been monitoring the public court filings in San Francisco County, as is our standard procedure for asset protection. We have noted the filing of Case CV 249008, the default judgment, and the subsequent recording of a grant deed, which has now been flagged as fraudulent by the Superior Court. The letter continued, the words sharp and precise, by filing a fraudulent lawsuit to evict you, and by attempting to forge a transfer of the primary beneficiary's assets. Robert and Margaret Guo have violated Clause 14, effective immediately. Their monthly stipend has been terminated. The remaining funds in the trust allocated for their support, approximately $800,000, will now revert to you, the primary beneficiary. I lowered the letter. My grandmother. She had known. Even from the grave, she had known them. She knew they would not be satisfied with their share. She knew they would eventually come for mine. And she had planted a landmine in the paperwork, waiting for them to step on it. They had tried to steal my house because they needed money. I realized that now. The bad investments I had suspected were likely worse than I thought. They needed the equity in my home to cover their debts. But in trying to steal the house, they had triggered the trap that cut off their only steady source of income. They had not just lost the war. They had burned their own supply lines. I folded the letter. I placed it on the counter. I did not feel happy. Happiness is too light a word. I felt a deep, resonant sense of balance. The universe had tilted, and gravity had finally done its work. I walked to the living room window. I looked out at the street. A patrol car turned the corner. It was not coming to my house. It moved slowly down the block, past the neighbors, and turned left toward the wealthy subdivision where my parents lived. It was not the same deputy from yesterday. This was a different officer, carrying a different set of papers. I imagined the scene. I imagined my parents sitting in their living room, the silence between them heavy with the wreckage of the morning. I imagined the doorbell ringing. I imagined my father walking to the door, his steps heavy, his arrogance stripped away. I imagined him opening the door to see a uniform. "Mr. Guo," the deputy would say, "I have a restraining order to serve you, and I have a summons for questioning regarding a felony investigation." They would finally understand. They would understand that the knock on the door at 6 in the morning is not a tool you use to scare children. It is the sound of consequences arriving. They had wanted to teach me a lesson about power. They wanted to show me that they could rewrite reality with a signature. Instead, they had taught me that reality is stubborn. They taught me that the truth is not what you say it is. The truth is what you can prove. I turned away from the window. I looked at my home. The light was fading, turning the walls a soft, warm gray. I saw the dust motes dancing in the air. I saw the scratch on the floorboards where I had dragged my sofa in 3 years ago. I saw the life I had built, imperfect and solitary and mine. It was safe. I was safe. I walked to the sofa and sat down. I did not turn on the TV. I did not call anyone. I just sat there, listening to the house breathe. There were no more noises, no knocks, no texts, just the silence of a file stamped closed. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a long journey from that first terrifying knock at the door to the final gavel, and I appreciate you sticking with me through every piece of evidence. I want to know what you guys think. If you were in my shoes, would you have confronted them in the hallway? Or would you have done exactly what I did and let the paper do the talking? Let me know in the comments below. And please tell me where you are listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed seeing justice served cold, please make sure to subscribe to the Emma Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people who need to know that sometimes the best revenge is just following the rules better than your enemies. Stay safe, keep your receipts, and I will see you in the next story.